Okay, so welcome back to the last chapter of Sun Tzu, The Art of War. I will be moving on after this to a new book, which I'll talk more about at the end of this little piece here. But this is just one short chapter in The Art of War, but it is maybe the most important one because it highlights the extent to which a true realist will see human beings ultimately as instruments or tools for his or her cause, the means to the end. And that has moral implications, as I think I've indicated all along. And yet, at the same time, this chapter gives us a pretty good idea of the moral argument for the realist as well. And I'm not coming down one way or the other on this, I just want to highlight it. So the first thing of note that Sun Tzu says is against the general or leader who's too cheap to pay for spies, basically who's penny wise and pound foolish. He says, yet one refusing to outlay 100 pieces of gold and thereby does not know the enemy's situation is the height of inhumanity. This one is not the general of the people or a help to a ruler or the master of victory. So I guess to highlight there, he's saying that a general who is too cheap to pay well for spies is the height of inhumanity. That highlights the realist's notion that if you're not willing to do what it takes to actually succeed, in a way, you are being immoral. It's a weird place to be in, but basically, yes, that it's the height of inhumanity because ultimately, without the knowledge that you can gain from the information, you will put people in harm's way who otherwise would not have to be, and the conflict will be longer, and you run a greater risk of being defeated. And so there's weirdly enough, a moral imperative to be immoral, and that's not just about the use of spies for a realist, but really the use of any sort of tactic that may be considered dishonest or immoral. The realist will argue, the hardcore realist will argue that not using that tactic prolongs conflict and it makes it more likely that your side will lose. And of course, you are responsible not for the entire world in this way of thinking, but your own set of people. So, anyway, so he goes on in the fifth paragraph to say, what enables the enlightened rulers and good generals to conquer the enemy at every move and achieve extraordinary success is foreknowledge. Foreknowledge, meaning knowing ahead of time. And he says, foreknowledge cannot be elicited from ghosts and spirits, meaning do not consult, your horoscope, or I guess in today's terms, that would be do not consult your incredible feeling that this will just go all right because the cosmic forces are guiding you and you just feel as though you're right. Instead, he says this foreknowledge needs to be obtained from people who have knowledge of the enemy's situation. And then he goes into the 5 kinds of spies: local spies, internal spies, double spies, dead spies, and living spies. Local spies are the enemy's people, he says. So picking up knowledge from the common people within the territory, which I suppose you can do by sending out your own people to chat them up. I'm not sure exactly, but you certainly wouldn't want to make a great announcement that you were there. And then internal spies, he says, we use the enemy's officials. So that becomes more difficult. To be able to use the enemy's officials, you have to have made an actual introduction and proposal, I would think, unless now, of course, we have some ways of obtaining information like that from other sources, electronic and otherwise. But back in those days, basically, I would think that would mean paying them off. And then he says for double spies, we use the enemy spies. Now that gets a bit complicated, but you're basically paying off those you catch or know to be spies spying on you, and you turn them. So they become your spies, but they pretend to still be the enemy spies, and they send false information back to the enemy, which leads to dead spies, which sends false information back to the enemy that they then find out later is false, and so they kill them. Now, Sun Tzu doesn't make this explicit, but this is what he's got to mean. That, you basically plant some disastrous information in the mind of a double spy, and you send them back knowing full well that once the enemy gets this information and it turns out to be disastrous for them, they will know that they've got a traitor and they will kill him. So this is the use of human beings as instruments or tools. This is the kind of cold, calculating way of thinking that such a leader has to have. I'm not condoning this by any means. I think it's very, very problematic. In fact, I think it's wrong. But this is the type of mentality that a leader who is extremely effective in these things must have. Machiavelli later on, much later on, said basically a leader has to be willing to go to hell if he wants to be an effective leader. So perhaps that's just something to contemplate further. But finally, he says, for living spies, we use agents to return with reports. So sending out your people or people you hire in the area to come back, having overheard or somehow detected information and come back and tell you. He repeats, there is no reward more generously given, okay? That the effective leader must pay spies well, and that this is the most difficult art. Only the wisest ruler can use spies well, he says. It is subtle. Subtle! Exclamation point. Meaning, if you're a fool, I guess don't bother using it, because you have to be extremely skillful to be able to use spies well. So, let's see, what else do we have here? Well, just a little bit of advice about turning spies into double spies. You must seek the enemy spies, bribe them, and instruct them, and retain them, and therefore double spies. So I think you get the point there. Dead spies can spread information, misinformation to the enemy. And from their knowledge, our living spies can be used as planned. So anyway, this is the end of The Art of War. It is the kind of most twisted part, you might say, because it most starkly gives you this image of what it takes to be an effective realist leader. A true realist, in the purest sense, is someone who uses human beings as weapons in a larger scheme of things. And when you think about it, those types of people are not rare at all, but actually quite every day. But the question is, will you know what's going on, and will you be able to understand the mentality of a person who's extremely politically effective? And so this is one of the many reasons for reading and studying a book such as The Art of War. Whether you engage in these tactics or not is an open question. Some of them are worthy. Sun Tzu has some very good points. Some of them are not. But it's all good information to have if you want to understand why it is that leaders do the things they do. So now that I've come to the end of this book, I will next take up, chapter by chapter, a very different book in some ways, but in some ways not. The Death of the Liberal Class by Chris Hedges, which was written a few years ago, but is extremely relevant now, and I think that I've got some things to say about it, which hopefully will be mind-opening, and also will hopefully encourage you to go and get the book. So anyway, In the meantime, thanks for listening, and hope that you join me for the next book. Bye.